Sometimes the loneliest people are the ones who once loved the deepest. Caleb Stone knew that truth better than most. He'd buried his heart in these Colorado mountains years ago, building walls higher than the peaks surrounding his cabin. It's the winter of 1882, and he lives alone by choice, keeping everyone at a distance. Then, one frozen evening, a woman stumbles to his door, half dead from the cold. He offers her one night of shelter, nothing more. But when a blizzard roars in that same night, that single act of kindness becomes something neither of them planned for. The storm lasts weeks, and two broken souls find themselves trapped together. What happens when you can't run from your past anymore? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like every other morning for the past 5 years. Caleb Stone woke before dawn, as was his habit, when the darkness still pressed heavy against the single window of his cabin. The cold bit at his face the moment he emerged from beneath the thick pile of furs and wool blankets that kept him alive through the mountain winters. His breath formed clouds in the frigid air as he moved to the stone hearth, where embers from the previous night's fire still glowed faintly beneath a layer of ash. He worked quietly, efficiently, building the fire back to life with practiced movements. Kindling first, then small splits of seasoned pine, finally the larger logs that would burn slow and steady through the day. The cabin gradually filled with warmth and the smell of burning wood, a scent so familiar it had become part of him, like the lines on his weathered face or the calluses on his hands. The cabin itself was a simple structure, built by Caleb's own hands when he'd first come to these mountains. Rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud and moss, formed walls thick enough to keep out the worst of the winter winds. A single room served all his needs. Sleeping area in one corner, small table and 2 chairs near the hearth, shelves lined with supplies along the far wall. Everything had its place, everything served a purpose. There was nothing decorative, nothing soft, nothing that spoke of comfort beyond basic survival. Above, in the small loft space accessible by a crude ladder, Caleb kept his extra supplies and things he had no use for anymore. He never went up there if he could help it. There were memories stored in that darkness, memories that had sharp edges. The window looked out onto a vista that would have stolen the breath from any man seeing it for the first time. Peaks rose in every direction, their tops white with snow even in summer, their slopes covered in dense forests of pine and spruce. In winter, like now, the world became a study in white and gray and the deep green of evergreens burdened with snow. The nearest neighbor was 2 days' ride down. The mountain and the nearest town was 4 days beyond that. Caleb had chosen this isolation deliberately, had sought it out like a man dying of thirst seeks water. He pulled on his heavy coat, the one made of elk hide and lined with fur, and stepped outside to check his traps and gather more firewood. The air was sharp enough to hurt, cold enough that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. The sky had that peculiar quality it got before a storm, a heavy grayness that pressed down from above, making the world feel smaller, more confined. Caleb had learned to read the weather up here. A man who couldn't would die quickly in these mountains. The signs were clear. A big storm was coming, maybe the biggest of the season so far. The wind had a certain bite to it, the clouds moved with a purpose, and the temperature was dropping faster than normal. He'd need to bring in extra wood, make sure everything was secure. If this storm was as bad as he suspected, he might be trapped inside for days. He worked through the morning, methodical and unhurried. There was a rhythm to this life, a simplicity that suited him. No one to answer to, no one to disappoint, no one to bury. Just the mountain and the seasons and the quiet work of staying alive. It was late afternoon, the gray sky growing darker when he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the mountain. Not the crack of a breaking branch under snow's weight, not the call of a raven or the distant howl of wolves. This was something else. A voice, human and desperate, calling out in the growing wind. Caleb stopped mid-swing, his axe buried in a log. He listened, wondering if he'd imagined it. The wind could play tricks up here, could make sounds that seemed almost human. But then it came again, clearer this time, closer. "Help, please, someone help me." A woman's voice. Caleb set down his axe and moved toward the sound, his hand instinctively going to the knife at his belt. In 5 years, no one had come to his cabin. No one knew it existed except the trapper who'd sold him supplies twice a year, and the old man had died last spring. He found her at the edge of the clearing, collapsed in the snow. She wore a traveling dress, foolish for these mountains, and a thin cloak that might as well have been made of paper for all the protection it offered against the cold. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung around her face in tangles. Her lips were blue, her hands raw and bleeding where she'd tried to shield them from the cold. She looked up at him with eyes that held both hope and fear. "Please," she whispered, "I'm lost. My horse. There was ice and he fell and I've been walking." Her words dissolved into shivering. Caleb stood there, torn between instincts. The part of him that had once been a husband, a protector, wanted to help immediately. But the part that had built these walls, that had chosen this isolation, warned him to send her on her way. Helping meant involvement. Involvement meant caring. Caring meant loss. But looking at her there in the snow, he knew she wouldn't survive the night. The temperature was already well below freezing and dropping fast. The storm was maybe an hour away, 2 at most. "Can you walk?" His voice came out rough from disuse. He rarely spoke anymore, and when he did, it was usually to himself or to the mountain. She tried to stand, stumbled, and he caught her arm. Through the thin fabric of her dress, he could feel how cold she was, how badly she was shaking. "My cabin's there," he said, nodding toward the structure barely visible through the trees. "I'll get you warm, give you some food, but come morning, you'll need to go. There's a town 4 days west of here. I'll draw you a map." She nodded, too cold and desperate to argue or ask questions. He supported most of her weight as they made their way to the cabin. She was light, too light, and he wondered when she'd last eaten. Inside, he settled her near the fire and wrapped her in blankets. Her teeth chattered so hard he worried she might crack them. He heated water, added some of his precious store of dried herbs, and made her drink the bitter tea that would help ward off the worst of the cold's effects. She didn't speak, just held the cup with shaking hands and stared into the fire. Caleb busied himself with preparing a simple meal: salt pork, beans, and hard bread. Nothing fancy, but it was hot and filling. As he worked, he was acutely aware of her presence in his space. It had been so long since another person had been here, so long since he'd heard breathing that wasn't his own. It felt strange, intrusive, like something wild had been brought inside where it didn't belong. The wind outside had started to pick up, and the first flakes of snow were beginning to fall. He looked out the window and felt a cold certainty settle in his chest. This wasn't going to be a normal storm. This was going to be one of the big ones, the kind that could last for days or even weeks, the kind that buried cabins and killed anyone foolish enough to be caught outside. One night, he'd promised himself. He'd give her one night, and then she'd be on her way. But as the wind began to howl and the snow began to fall in earnest, Caleb Stone had the sinking feeling that the mountain had other plans. He touched the worn wedding ring that still hung on a leather cord around his neck, hidden beneath his shirt. It was the last piece of his old life, the last connection to the man he used to be. The woman by his fire shifted, and he saw her eyes were closed now, her breathing evening out as the warmth finally reached her core. She looked young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that might have been pretty under better circumstances. There was something refined about her features, something that spoke of a life very different from the one he led. Who was she? What was she running from? Because people didn't end up in these mountains by accident. They came here to escape something, just like he had. The questions stirred in his mind, but he pushed them away. It didn't matter. She'd be gone in the morning, and his life would return to its comfortable, empty rhythm. Outside, the blizzard was beginning in earnest. Caleb woke to a world transformed. The howling wind had finally quieted sometime before dawn, leaving behind an eerie silence that pressed against the cabin walls like something living. He rose from his bedroll on the floor. He'd given the woman his sleeping area by the warmth of the dying fire, and moved to the window. What he saw made his chest tighten. Snow had piled against the cabin in drifts that reached halfway up the walls. The window itself was nearly covered, allowing only a dim gray light to filter through the top few inches. The trees he could barely see were bent under the weight of snow, their branches forming strange, sculptural shapes in white. The world beyond his cabin had disappeared entirely, swallowed by the blizzard. He'd seen bad storms before, but this was something else. This was the kind of storm old-timers talked about around fires, the kind that changed landscapes and made new widows, and it showed no signs of stopping. Through the small visible patch of sky, he could see more snow falling, thick and steady. Behind him, he heard the woman stir. He turned to find her sitting up, the blankets wrapped around her shoulders, staring at him with eyes that had regained some of their clarity overnight. She was still pale, but the blue had left her lips, and she no longer shook with cold. "How long was I asleep?" Her voice was soft, educated. The kind of voice that belonged in a parlor, not a mountain cabin. "Most of the night." Caleb moved to build up the fire, needing something to do with his hands. "Storm came in harder than I expected." She rose, moving stiffly to the window. He watched as she took in the view, saw her face change as she understood what it meant. "We're snowed in." "Yes, ma'am." "How long?" Caleb fed another log to the fire before answering. "Hard to say. Could be a few days, could be longer." He didn't tell her what he was really thinking, that storms like this could last a week or more, and that even when they ended, it might be days or weeks before the passes were clear enough to travel. She was quiet for a long moment, her hand pressed against the cold glass. "I told myself I just needed to make it through one night. Just one night, and then I could keep moving." "Moving where?" The question came out before he could stop it, before he could remind himself that her business was her own and he wanted no part of it. She turned to face him, and he saw something flicker across her face. Calculation, perhaps, or fear. "West California, eventually. I have—" She stopped, seemed to reconsider. "I was hoping to find work there, a new start." It was a lie, or at least not the whole truth. Caleb had spent enough years reading men's faces in difficult situations to know when someone was holding back. But he didn't press. If she wanted to keep her secrets, that was fine by him. He had plenty of his own. "You have a name?" he asked instead. "Emma." She hesitated only briefly. "Emma Hartford." "Caleb Stone." He gestured to the table. "You should eat something. We need to talk about supplies." Over a breakfast of fried salt pork and the last of his fresh eggs, he'd need to make do with dried and preserved foods now. He laid out the situation plainly. He had enough food for one person to last through winter with some to spare. For two people, if they were careful and the storm didn't last too long, they'd be all right. But there were limits. Emma listened without interrupting, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee. When he finished, she nodded. "I understand. I'll try not to be a burden. Is there anything I can do to help?" "Can you cook?" "Some. My mother taught me the basics before." She stopped again, that same careful editing of information. "I can manage simple meals." "That'll help." Caleb stood, moving to the shelves where he kept his supplies. "We'll need to ration carefully. I've got dried beans, salt pork, flour, some cornmeal, preserved vegetables from last summer, Coffee and tea, but those will have to be treats, not regular. He pulled down a sack of flour and paused, his hand resting on it. Having someone else here, planning meals for two, rationing supplies, it was so painfully familiar it made his chest ache. Mary had stood in this very spot once, though in a different cabin in a different life, making the same calculations, planning how to stretch their stores through a hard winter. "Mr. Stone," Emma's voice pulled him back. "Are you all right?" "Fine." He set down the flour more roughly than he'd intended. "I need to check the exterior, see if we can get to the woodshed. We'll need to bring in as much as we can carry." She stood. "I'll help. You don't have proper clothes for it. Then I'll freeze, but I'll still help. You said we're in this together as long as the storm lasts. I won't sit by the fire while you work." There was steel beneath that refined exterior, Caleb realized. Whatever had driven Emma Hartford into these mountains, she wasn't some helpless city girl who'd crumble at the first hardship. They bundled up as best they could, Emma wearing his spare coat over her thin dress, her hands wrapped in extra wool, and fought their way out the door. The cold was vicious, stealing breath and biting exposed skin. The wind had died down, but the snow was still falling thick and fast, reducing visibility to just a few yards. The woodshed was only 20 feet from the cabin, but it might as well have been a mile. They waded through drifts that reached Emma's waist, Caleb breaking trail ahead of her. By the time they reached the shed, both were breathing hard, their faces numb with cold. They made trip after trip, carrying armloads of split wood back to the cabin. It was hard, exhausting work, and Emma never complained once, though he could see her struggling with the cold and the effort. Her determination reminded him of Mary again, that same stubborn refusal to be less than an equal partner. On their final trip, as they reached the cabin door, Emma's foot slipped on ice hidden beneath the snow. She went down hard, and the wood she'd been carrying scattered. Caleb helped her up, noting how she bit her lip against what must have been pain from the fall. Inside, with the door barred against the storm and a good supply of wood stacked by the hearth, they both stood dripping melted snow onto the floor, breathing hard. "We should get you out of those wet clothes," Caleb said, then felt awkward at how the words sounded. "I mean, I'll turn around. There's a dry shirt and some pants in the chest there. They'll be too big, but they're warm." Emma nodded, too cold to care about modesty. While Caleb busied himself with the fire, he heard the rustle of fabric, the small sounds of someone changing clothes. When he turned back, she was swimming in his old work clothes, the pants' legs rolled up several times, the shirt hanging past her hips. Her hair was loose and drying, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked young and vulnerable, and nothing like the proper lady who'd collapsed in his snow the night before. And something in Caleb's carefully guarded heart shifted, just slightly, like ice beginning to crack. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for all of this. I know you didn't ask for a stranger to disrupt your life." Caleb turned back to the fire. "Storm did that, not you." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't quite true. The storm had trapped her here, yes, but he'd made the choice to help her in the first place, and that choice, that small moment of mercy, was going to change everything. They spent the rest of the day establishing routines, dividing tasks, learning to move around each other in the small space. Emma proved competent with cooking, better than Caleb had been managing on his own. She cleaned and organized with the efficiency that spoke of practice, though her hands were soft, uncalloused, not the hands of someone used to hard labor. As night fell and they sat on opposite sides of the fire, the cabin felt both smaller and more alive than it had in years. Caleb found himself acutely aware of every sound she made, every movement. It was uncomfortable, this sudden intrusion of another presence into his carefully maintained solitude. Emma pulled something from the pocket of her discarded dress, a piece of paper, worn and creased from handling. She stared at it for a long moment, and even in the firelight, Caleb could see it was a train ticket. "One way to Sacramento," she said softly, noticing his glance. Leaves from Denver in 3 days. Or it did. I suppose I've missed it now. You can get another ticket when the storm clears. She folded the paper carefully and tucked it away. Can I? I'm not sure I can. She looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something he recognized, the look of someone running from something that couldn't be outrun. Mr. Stone, I need to tell you something about why I'm really here. Caleb held up a hand. You don't owe me explanations. But I do, because if anyone comes looking... She stopped, swallowed hard. My stepfather is a powerful man, a railroad executive named Charles Blackwood. Perhaps you've heard of him. Caleb had, vaguely. The kind of man whose name appeared in newspapers, who built empires on the backs of other men's labor. He arranged a marriage for me, Emma continued, to his business associate, Marcus Pemberton. I'm told Mr. Pemberton is very eager to acquire... Her voice hardened slightly. A young wife. He's 53 years old, and his last 2 wives died under circumstances that were never quite explained to anyone's satisfaction. So you ran. So I ran. She met his eyes steadily. And I won't go back. I'd rather die in these mountains than become that man's property. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Caleb understood, perhaps better than she knew, what it meant to choose a hard death over an impossible life. Well, he said finally, good thing you're stuck here with me instead of dead in a snowbank then. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. Good thing. Outside, the wind picked up again, howling around the cabin walls. The storm wasn't done with them yet. Caleb lay awake long after Emma had fallen asleep, listening to the wind and thinking about choices and consequences, about mercy and isolation, about a worn wedding ring that hung against his chest, and the way his carefully constructed walls had already started to crack. 2 weeks into the storm, the cabin had become its own small world, complete and separate from anything that existed beyond its walls. Time had taken on a strange quality, days blended together, marked only by the rituals of survival and the slow, steady deepening of the connection between its 2 inhabitants. Emma found the sewing kit on a gray afternoon while Caleb was outside checking the condition of the woodshed roof. She'd been looking for something, anything to occupy her hands during the long, quiet hours, and had opened a small wooden box tucked away on one of the shelves. Inside was a collection of needles, thread in various colors, a small pair of scissors, and a thimble so delicate it could only have belonged to a woman with small hands. Everything was neatly organized, carefully preserved, clearly precious to someone. Emma ran her fingers over the contents, and even without being told, she knew these had belonged to Mary Stone. There was something intimate about sewing supplies, something personal. These were tools that had been held countless times, had created and mended and repaired. They carried history in their worn surfaces. She should put them back, should close the box and walk away. Instead, she took out a needle and thread and began working on Caleb's shirt, the one she'd started mending days ago but hadn't finished. Her stitches were careful, small, almost invisible. The kind of stitches her own mother had taught her before Charles Blackwood had entered their lives, and everything had changed. She was so focused on the work that she didn't hear Caleb come back inside, didn't know he was there until his voice cut through the quiet. "What are you doing?" Emma looked up, startled, and saw his face. The anger there. No, not anger. Something deeper, more painful. Betrayal, perhaps. Grief. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, setting down the shirt. I needed something to do and I found this box." That was Mary's. His voice was flat, controlled, but Emma could hear the emotion beneath it. Those were her things. "I know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched them without asking." She started to put everything back in the box, her hands trembling slightly. "I wasn't thinking—" "No, you weren't." Caleb moved past her, took the box from her hands. These are, sir. He stopped, seemed to struggle with words. You can't just go through other people's belongings. You can't just touch things that aren't yours. Emma stood, feeling her own emotions rise. I was trying to help. Your clothes are falling apart, and I thought, you thought wrong. He held the box like it was something fragile, something that might break if he gripped it too hard. This isn't your home, Emma. These aren't your things to use. The words hit harder than Emma expected. She'd started to feel, foolishly, she realized now, like maybe this could be a home, like maybe she belonged here, with him, in this small cabin against the storm. But his words reminded her sharply that she was a guest at best, an intruder at worst. You're right, she said quietly. I apologize. It won't happen again. She moved to the far side of the cabin, as far from him as the small space allowed, and stood looking out the small gap in the window that wasn't covered by snow. Behind her, she heard Caleb moving around, heard the box being put away somewhere she couldn't find it again. The silence that followed was different from their previous silences. This one was sharp and uncomfortable, filled with hurt on both sides. It was Caleb who finally broke it. I'm sorry. His voice came from directly behind her, startling her. That was... I overreacted. Emma didn't turn around. No, you were right. I shouldn't have presumed. Emma, look at me. She turned slowly. He was standing closer than she'd expected, close enough that she could see the conflict in his eyes, the war between grief and something else. Those things, they're all I have left of her, he said. I kept them because touching them sometimes makes me feel like she's not completely gone, like some part of her is still here. He paused. But that's not fair to you. You were trying to help, and You're not ready to share those things yet, Emma finished gently. I understand. Do you? My father had a pocket watch, Emma said. After he died, my mother put it away in a drawer. She said she couldn't bear to look at it, that it hurt too much. I used to sneak into her room and hold it, wind it up just to hear it tick. It made me feel closer to him. She met Caleb's eyes. Then Charles found me with it one day, took it, said I was being morbid, that I needed to let go of the past. I never saw it again. Understanding passed between them, recognition of shared loss and the different ways people tried to survive it. I won't touch Mary's things again, Emma said. But Caleb, she sounds like she was a kind woman. Do you think she'd want her sewing kit sitting unused while your clothes fall apart? Or would she want someone to use it, to make it useful again? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he moved to where he'd hidden the box, brought it back, and set it on the table between them. Her stitches were better than anyone's I ever saw, he said softly. Small and even, almost invisible. She used to say that good mending shouldn't be obvious, that the point was to make something whole again without calling attention to the broken places. That's beautiful. She was beautiful, not just in how she looked, in how she saw the world, how she moved through it. She made everything better just by being there. He touched the box gently. I haven't been able to let go of her. Part of me doesn't want to. Maybe you don't have to let go, Emma said carefully. Maybe you just have to make room for her memory to exist alongside whatever comes next. Caleb looked at her then. Really looked. And Emma felt her breath catch. There was something in his expression, something tender and terrified and full of possibility. I'm afraid, he admitted. I'm afraid that if I move forward, I'll lose her completely, that I'll forget. You won't forget. Emma took a small step closer. Love like that. It doesn't disappear just because you're ready to live again. It changes maybe, but it doesn't vanish. How do you know? I don't, she confessed, but I have to believe it's true. Otherwise, what's the point of loving at all? Caleb reached out, and for a moment Emma thought he might touch her face. Instead, his hand hovered in the air between them before falling back to his side. You can use the sewing kit, he said. Mary would. She would want it to be useful. Thank you. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, the storm still raging outside, and something shifted between them again. Not healed exactly. Some wounds were too deep for quick healing, but acknowledged, understood, accepted. That evening, Emma carefully mended Caleb's shirt with Mary's needles and thread, her stitches small and, even, nearly invisible. Caleb watched her work, and for the first time in 5 years, the sight of someone using his wife's things didn't feel like a betrayal. It felt like a bridge between past and present, between grief and hope, between the man he'd been and whoever he might become. When Emma handed him the mended shirt, their fingers brushed and neither pulled away quickly. The touch lingered, warm and full of unspoken questions, while outside the wind howled and the snow continued its endless fall. 3 weeks into the storm, and the provisions were running thin enough that Caleb couldn't ignore the numbers anymore. He stood at the storage shelves at dawn, doing calculations in his head that kept coming up short no matter how he adjusted them. The flour was nearly gone. The salt pork was down to the last few pieces. The preserved vegetables were exhausted. They had beans, thank God for beans, and some cornmeal, and that was about it. Coffee had become a memory. Tea was a luxury they'd stopped pretending they could afford. If the storm lasted another week, they'd be in serious trouble. 2 weeks, and they'd be facing starvation. Emma appeared at his shoulder, silent as a ghost. She'd learned to move quietly in the cabin, to read his moods, to know when he needed space and when he needed presence. "How bad?" she asked. No point in lying. "Bad. We've got maybe 10 days of real food if we're careful. After that..." He shook his head. "After that, we start rationing even more severely. After that, we start eating leather boots and hoping for the best." It should have been funny. Should have been the kind of grim joke people make in hard situations. But neither of them laughed. "I'm sorry," Emma said. "This is my fault. If I hadn't..." "Don't." Caleb turned to face her. "This isn't your fault. Storm's fault, maybe God's fault if you believe in that sort of thing, but not yours. Still, you'd have enough if it was just you." "Yeah, well..." He looked away. "Turns out I'm not good at being just me anymore." The admission hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Emma touched his arm, and even through the layers of clothing, Caleb felt the warmth of it. "We'll figure something out," she said. "We've made it this far." That evening, Caleb did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled out the bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, the one he'd told himself was for special occasions that never came. He poured 2 small measures into tin cups and handed one to Emma. "What are we drinking to?" she asked. "Survival, bad decisions, making it through another day." He raised his cup. "Take your pick." They drank in silence, the whiskey burning warm down their throats. It was good quality. Caleb had bought it years ago when he still cared about such things, before his world had narrowed to just staying alive. The alcohol loosened something in both of them. Emma spoke first. "I don't have any plan, you know, for after." She stared into her cup. "I thought I did. Thought I'd get to California, find work, start over. But that was just fantasy. A woman alone with no references, no skills anyone wants to pay for. I'd have ended up in a brothel or married to someone just as bad as Marcus Pemberton within a month. You have skills. I can embroider, I can plan a dinner party. I can smile and nod and make conversation with boring men while pretending their opinions are fascinating." Her voice was bitter. "None of that means anything out here. None of that keeps you alive. You learn to maintain a fire, to ration supplies, to mend clothes properly." Caleb took another sip. "You learn to survive. Only because you taught me. Because you were willing to learn." He set down his cup. "That counts for more than you think." Emma was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can I tell you something? Something I haven't told anyone. You can tell me anything. I'm not just running from an arranged marriage. She took a breath. Charles, my stepfather. He stole my inheritance. My father left everything to me in a trust, money that was supposed to come to me when I turned 25. But Charles convinced my mother to sign papers, making him executor, and then he just took it, used it to expand his railroad empire. That's theft. It is. But he's powerful enough that no one would challenge him on it. Emma's hands tightened around her cup. So I took some of it back. $5,000 in bearer bonds that he kept in his study. They were mine by right, but in the eyes of the law, you're a thief. Yes, she met his eyes. I'm a wanted woman, Caleb, not just a runaway bride, an actual criminal with a price on her head. Caleb should have been shocked, should have felt betrayed that she'd hidden this from him. Instead, he found himself asking, "How much is the reward?" $1,000. He whistled low. That's serious money. Charles wants me back. Not for the bonds. That's pocket change to him. He wants me back because I defied him, because I ran. Men like him can't tolerate disobedience. She looked away. If anyone ever finds out where I am, they won't. You don't know that. Emma, look around. We're trapped in a cabin in the worst storm I've seen in 5 years. We're miles from the nearest person. Even if someone came looking, which they won't, not in this weather, they'd never find us. He reached across the small distance between them, took her hand. You're safe here. For how long? For as long as it takes. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence. Emma's hand was small in his, cold despite the warmth of the cabin. Caleb realized he was holding it, really holding it, and should probably let go, but he didn't want to. My turn, he said, for confessions. You don't have to. I want to. He took a breath. I told you I was cavalry. What I didn't say was that I was discharged dishonorably, spent 6 months in a military prison. Emma's eyes widened, but she didn't pull her hand away. There was a settler family, Caleb continued. German immigrants had a small farm on land my commanding officer wanted. He claimed they were squatters, ordered me to run them off, but they had papers, legal claim to the land. He didn't care, told me to burn them out. But you didn't. I didn't. Stood between them and the rest of my unit, told the CO he was wrong. He had me arrested for insubordination. Caleb's jaw tightened. While I was in prison, Mary, she was pregnant and the stress. She went into labor early. I got word 3 days after she'd died. Oh, Caleb. They let me out for the funeral. Gave me 2 days to bury my wife and daughter, then put me back in chains. By the time I was released, I had nothing. No family, no honor, no home. He looked at Emma. So I came here to disappear. But you saved that family. Did I? I lost everything that mattered to me. Sometimes I wonder if it was worth it. Emma squeezed his hand. It was worth it. Those people lived because of you. That matters, even if it cost you everything. Does it? Yes. Her voice was fierce. Because the alternative is a world where good men do nothing, where people like Charles Blackwood and Marcus Pemberton and your commanding officer just take what they want without consequence. You paid a terrible price, but you did the right thing. Caleb wanted to believe her. Looking at her now, at the conviction in her eyes, he almost could. They sat together as the fire burned low, hands still clasped, sharing the weight of their pasts and the uncertainty of their futures. Outside, the wind howled and the snow fell, but inside the cabin, something was growing that neither of them could name yet. Something that felt dangerously like hope. On the morning of the 28th day, the wind finally stopped. Caleb woke to silence so profound it was almost frightening. For 4 weeks, the howl of the storm had been a constant companion, so ever-present that it had become like breathing, something you didn't notice until it stopped. Now the quiet, pressed against his ears, made him question whether he'd gone deaf in the night. He rose quickly, moved to the window. The sky was clear for the first time in weeks, a pale winter blue that seemed impossible after so much grey. The sun was rising, painting the snow-covered peaks in shades of pink and gold. The storm had broken. Emma appeared at his side, her hair loose around her shoulders, sleep still soft in her eyes. "It's over." "Yeah." Caleb felt a strange tightness in his chest. This was what they'd been waiting for, what they'd been hoping for, but now that it was here, he felt no relief. Only a sick dread at what came next. "I should," Emma started, then stopped. "I suppose I should start getting ready to leave." "Suppose so." Neither of them moved. "Caleb." "I need to dig us out," he said abruptly. "See how much snow we're dealing with, figure out the best route down the mountain. Might take a few days to make the path passable." "I'll help." They worked in silence, the ease between them from the previous night replaced by an awkwardness neither knew how to navigate. The truth was simple and complicated all at once. The storm had ended, which meant Emma's time here was finished. She would leave, and Caleb would return to his solitude, and that was how it had to be. Except neither of them wanted it anymore. By afternoon they'd cleared a path to the woodshed and assessed the situation. The snow was deep, over 6 feet in the drifts, but manageable. With work, Caleb could have a trail broken down to the main path within 3 or 4 days. From there, Emma could make her way to the trading post, maybe catch a ride with a supply wagon heading toward Denver. They were discussing logistics when they heard it, the distant sound of horses. Caleb froze, his hand going instinctively to the rifle he'd brought outside. "Get inside." "What?" "Now, Emma." "Inside." She must have heard something in his voice because she didn't argue. They both retreated to the cabin, and Caleb positioned himself by the window, rifle ready. 3 riders appeared through the trees, moving slowly through the deep snow. They wore heavy coats and carried themselves with the confidence of men who knew their business. Even from a distance, Caleb could see they weren't trappers or friendly travelers. They were looking for something, or someone. Emma came to stand behind him, peering out the window. He heard her breath catch, felt her body go rigid with fear. "Do you know them?" "The one in front. That's James Morrow. He works for Charles, head of security for the railroad." Her voice shook. "They found me." Caleb's mind raced. How had they known to look here? How had they found the cabin? But even as he asked the questions, he knew the answer. They'd been searching systematically, checking every possible shelter in the mountains. The storm had delayed them, but not stopped them. "Maybe they'll pass by," Emma whispered. But the riders were heading directly for the cabin, following the freshly broken trail through the snow. They knew someone was here. "Emma." Caleb set down the rifle, turned to face her. "I need you to listen carefully. Whatever happens, stay calm. Let me do the talking." "Caleb, you don't understand. These men, Charles sent them to bring me back, and they'll do whatever it takes. If you stand between them and their orders, then I stand between them and their orders." He took her shoulders gently. "Trust me." Before she could respond, a voice called out from outside. "Hello, the cabin. We're looking for someone. Mean no harm, just want to talk." Caleb opened the door, stepped out with his rifle held loosely but ready. The 3 men had stopped about 20 yards from the cabin, their horses stamping and snorting in the cold. "Help, you gentlemen with something?" Caleb kept his voice neutral. The lead rider, Morrow, leaned forward in his saddle. He was a big man, solid and competent looking, with a scar running down one cheek. "Looking for a young woman, Emma Hartford, about 5.5 feet tall, dark hair. She ran away from her family about a month ago. They're worried sick about her. Haven't seen anyone matching that description." "That's so?" Morrow's eyes traveled to the cabin, taking in the smoke from the chimney. the signs of recent activity. "You've been up here alone all winter." "That's right. Funny thing." Morrow swung down from his horse, and the other two men followed suit. "We talked to a trapper down at Sawyer's Post last week. He mentioned selling supplies to someone up this way. Said there were tracks that looked like a woman's boots mixed in with the rest." Caleb cursed inwardly. He'd forgotten about the tracks from that first desperate trip to the woodshed before the storm had completely buried everything. Maybe the trapper was mistaken. Maybe. Morrow took a few steps closer. Or maybe you're harboring a fugitive, because Miss Hartford isn't just a runaway girlfriend. She's wanted for theft, took $5,000 in bearer bonds from her stepfather. That's a serious crime. Behind Caleb, the cabin door opened. Emma stepped out, her chin raised, her hands steady despite the fear he knew she must be feeling. "He doesn't know anything about the bonds," she said clearly. "He gave me shelter during the storm, that's all." Morrow's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, at having his quarry cornered. "Miss Hartford, your family will be relieved to know you're safe." "I doubt that." Emma moved to stand beside Caleb. "Charles wants me back because I defied him, because I refused to be sold like cattle to Marcus Pemberton. That's between you and your family, ma'am. I'm just here to bring you home." "And the bonds?" Caleb asked. "Those belong to her by right of her father's will. According to Mr. Blackwood, they belong to the estate, which he controls." Morrow shrugged. "Again, not my concern. My job is to return Miss Hartford to Denver. And if she doesn't want to go?" The two men behind Morrow shifted, hands moving toward their weapons. The message was clear. "Then things get difficult for everyone," Morrow said. "Including you, friend. Interfering with the recovery of stolen property, harboring a known fugitive. Those are charges that could see you in prison, or worse." Caleb felt Emma tense beside him. She was going to give herself up, he realized. Going to sacrifice herself to protect him from consequences she thought he couldn't handle. But she didn't know who she was dealing with. "Here's what's going to happen," Caleb said, his voice taking on the tone he'd used as a cavalry officer, the one that expected to be obeyed. "You're going to get back on your horses and ride. Out of here. Miss Hartford is staying with me of her own free will. The bonds she took are legally hers, and if her stepfather wants to dispute that, he can take it up with a proper court." Morrow actually smiled. "You really want to die on this hill, friend? For a girl you just met?" "I've died on worse hills for less." Something in Caleb's eyes must have convinced Morrow that he was serious, because the man's smile faded. "We're not leaving without her." "Yes, you are." Caleb raised his rifle slightly, not quite pointing it at anyone, but making his intentions clear. "Because the alternative is a gunfight you might win, but at least one of you definitely won't walk away from. Maybe more. And for what? $1,000 reward split 3 ways?" The men behind Morrow exchanged glances. They were hired muscle, not martyrs. "Mr. Blackwood won't let this go," Morrow said. "He'll send more men, better men." "Let him." Caleb's grip on the rifle never wavered. "But not today. Today, you're leaving." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Morrow nodded slowly. "Your funeral, friend." He mounted his horse, and after a moment, the other two did the same. "We'll tell Mr. Blackwood his stepdaughter is alive and well. What he does with that information is up to him." They rode out slowly, deliberately, leaving deep tracks in the snow. Caleb watched until they disappeared into the trees, then watched for 10 minutes more to make sure they weren't circling back. When he finally lowered the rifle, his hands were shaking slightly. Not from fear, he'd faced worse odds in his cavalry days, but from the aftermath of adrenaline and the realization of what he'd just done. He'd chosen, made a stand, committed himself to protecting Emma against whatever came next. Emma was staring at him, her face pale. "Caleb, what have you done?" "What I had to. They'll come back, More of them, better armed. Charles won't. I know. He turned to face her. But I'm not letting them take you. Not now. Not ever. Why? The word came out broken, desperate. Why would you risk everything for me? Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the answer plainly. Somewhere in the past 4 weeks, somewhere between the storm and the fire and the quiet conversations in the dark, Emma Hartford had stopped being a stranger seeking shelter and had become something else entirely. She'd become the reason he wanted to keep living. Because, he said simply, I've spent 5 years dying slow up here. And then you showed up, and for the first time in all that time I remembered what it felt like to be alive. He took a breath. I'm not giving that up without a fight. Emma's eyes filled with tears. You barely know me. I know enough. He set down the rifle, moved to take her hands. I know you're brave and stubborn and stronger than you think. I know you make terrible cornbread and your stitches are almost as good as Mary's were. I know when you laugh, it fills this cabin with something I thought I'd lost forever. He squeezed her hands gently. And I know that if they take you back to Denver, to that life you ran from, it'll kill something essential in you. Maybe not your body, but your spirit. And I can't let that happen. Caleb, we'll figure it out, he said. Together, whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Emma pulled her hands free, but only to throw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her, feeling her shake with tears or relief or fear. Probably all three. Above them, the winter sun continued its arc across the clear blue sky. The storm had ended, but a different kind of storm was gathering on the horizon. One that would test everything they'd found in each other, everything they'd learned about survival and sacrifice, and the fierce determination to protect what mattered. But for now, in this moment, they held each other in the bright winter sunlight and chose to be grateful for whatever time they had left. 3 days after Morrow and his men left, Caleb made the trip down to Sawyer's Post. He needed information, needed to know what they were facing, and the old trapper who ran the trading post was the best source of news and gossip within 50 miles. He left Emma at the cabin with a rifle and strict instructions not to open the door for anyone but him. The separation felt wrong, dangerous, but necessary. If Blackwood's men came back while he was gone, at least Emma could defend herself, and besides, he reasoned, they likely wouldn't return so soon. They'd need time to report back, time for Blackwood to decide his next move. The trail down was hard going, even with the storm past. The snow was deep and unstable, prone to small avalanches that could trap or kill an unwary traveler. But Caleb had walked these mountains for 5 years, knew their moods and dangers, and he made it to the trading post by late afternoon. Sawyer's Post was barely more than a large cabin with a few outbuildings, but it served as the social hub for the scattered trappers and mountain men who lived in the high country. Jacob Sawyer, a grizzled German immigrant in his 60s, ran the place with his Ute wife, Sarah, and had been trading up here since before Caleb arrived. Caleb Stone. Jacob looked up from the counter where he'd been sorting through furs. Thought maybe the storm got you. Been 4 weeks since anyone seen smoke from your direction. Storm tried its best. Caleb closed the door behind him, grateful for the warmth from the pot-bellied stove. I need information, Jacob. The old man's eyes sharpened. About the men who came through here week before last? The ones asking about a girl? You told them where to find me. Didn't have much choice. They were offering good money for information, and they weren't the type to take no for an answer. Jacob set down the furs. They find what they were looking for? They found her. She's staying with me. Jacob whistled low. That's a complication. These men, Caleb, they're not giving up easy. The one in charge, Morrow, he came back through yesterday, bought supplies, sent a telegram from my wire. He's calling in reinforcements. Caleb's chest tightened. How many? Telegram said 5 more men, maybe 6. Professional types, from what I could hear. They're planning to come back in force, probably within the week. Jacob leaned against the counter. Caleb, I don't know what you got yourself into, but this girl must be awful important to somebody. She is, to me anyway. Understanding dawned in Jacob's weathered face. Ah, like that, is it? Like that. Her choice or yours? Both, I think. Caleb moved to the stove, warming his hands. They're saying she's a fugitive. Stole bonds from her stepfather. Did she? Yes. But they were rightfully hers. Her stepfather's the real thief, but he's got the law on his side. Jacob was quiet for a moment, then said, Sarah's people have a saying. Sometimes the law and justice are two different paths, and a good man has to choose which one he walks. Sounds like you made your choice. I did. But now I need to figure out how to keep her safe. 8 or 9 armed men against one. Those aren't odds I like. You planning to fight them? If I have to. Jacob shook his head. That's suicide, friend. Even for someone with your skills. He paused. You were cavalry, yes? Before you came up here? I was. Then you know tactics, strategy. Use that brain of yours instead of just your gun. Jacob pulled out a rough map of the mountain region, spread it on the counter. You remember the old hunting shelter, the one up past Eagle Ridge? Caleb studied the map. He knew the place Jacob was indicating. A small, well-hidden cabin that hunters used during elk season. It was remote, even more isolated than his own place, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through treacherous terrain. I remember. It's defensible. Good sight lines. Only one way in. If you're going to make a stand, better to do it there than at your cabin. Jacob tapped the map. Take the girl, your supplies, hole up there. Make them come to you on your terms, not theirs. That still doesn't solve the numbers problem. No, but it buys you time, and time has a way of changing situations. Jacob rolled up the map. Take this. Mark out the route. Study the terrain. If you're smart about it, if you use the land right, maybe you can make those odds a little better. Caleb took the map, grateful. Why are you helping me? You don't know Emma, don't know if she's worth this trouble. Maybe not, but I know you. Jacob met his eyes steadily. 5 years I've watched you up here, dying by inches, turning into a ghost. Last few times you came through, I could barely get 2 words out of you. Now look at you, actually caring about something again, actually fighting for something. He smiled slightly. Whatever this girl is to you, she's already saved your life once. Seems only fair you return the favor. Caleb spent another hour at the trading post, gathering supplies, ammunition, dried food, medical supplies, and paying with the last of his carefully hoarded money. Jacob threw in extra powder and shot without being asked, waved away Caleb's protests. Call it an investment, the old man said, in seeing how this turns out. As Caleb was preparing to leave, Sarah Sawyer appeared from the back room. She was a small woman, quiet and observant, with the kind of eyes that saw through pretense to truth. The girl, she said, she is your heart now. Caleb felt his face heat, but he didn't deny it. Yes, Sarah nodded, satisfied. Good. A man without heart is already dead. You take this. She pressed something into his hand, a small leather pouch that smelled of sage and sweetgrass. Protection. My grandmother's medicine. Keep it with you. Keep your heart safe. Thank you, Sarah. You welcome her here, Sarah added. When this is over, she will need woman to talk to. Men are good for many things, but not for understanding woman's heart. The journey back to the cabin took longer than the trip down, weighted as Caleb was with supplies and the knowledge of what was coming. But his mind was working, turning over plans and possibilities, analyzing the terrain with the tactical eye he'd developed during his cavalry years. Jacob was right, the hunting shelter was better defensible than his cabin. But getting Emma there safely, preparing adequate defenses, all while staying ahead of Blackwood's men, that would take planning and luck in equal measure. He reached the cabin just as darkness was falling. Emma yanked open the door before he could knock, the rifle in her hands, relief flooding her face. Thank God. I was starting to think. She stopped, set down the rifle. What did you find out? Caleb told her everything as he unpacked the supplies. Emma listened without interrupting, her face growing paler with each detail. More men, she said when he finished. Of course. Charles always believes more force is the solution to every problem. She sat down heavily. Caleb, maybe I should just go, turn myself in. It's not fair that you... No. He crossed to her, took her hands. We're past that point, Emma. Past the point where walking away solves anything. They know you're here, know I'm protecting you. Even if you left now, they'd still come after me for interfering. We're in this together now. But 8 or 9 men, I've faced worse odds. Have you? He hesitated, then admitted, no. But I've got advantages they don't have. I know this mountain, know every trail and pass. I know how to use terrain to my benefit, and I've got something they don't, something worth fighting for. Emma's eyes filled. You can't just say things like that. Why not? It's true. He pulled her to her feet. Emma, I'm not going to lie and say this will be easy. It won't. There's a good chance we both die on this mountain in the next week or 2. But I'd rather die fighting beside you than live another 50 years alone in this cabin, wondering what I was too afraid to reach for. When did you become a poet? I'm not a poet. I'm just a man who's finally figured out what he's willing to die for. He touched her face gently. And what he's willing to live for. She leaned into his touch, and for a moment they just stood there, drawing strength from each other. Then Emma straightened, and Caleb saw steel come into her eyes, the same steel that had carried her out of Denver and into the mountains alone. All right, she said. What's the plan? They spent the evening going over details. The move to the hunting shelter, what supplies to take, what to leave behind, the route they'd follow, how to hide their trail, the defensive preparations they'd need to make once they arrived. Caleb spread out Jacob's map on the table, showed Emma the terrain, explained how they could use the narrow approach to their advantage. It's a bottleneck, he explained, only one way up and it's steep, forces them to come at a single file or near enough, negates their numbers advantage. What about escape routes? There's a back way down, steep but passable. If things go bad, we can get out. He didn't mention that the back way was barely more than a rock climb and would be nearly impossible in a fight. Emma seemed to read his thoughts anyway. You're planning to make your stand there. Our stand, he corrected. And yes, because if we keep running, they'll keep following. Eventually they'll catch us in the open, on their terms. This way, at least we choose the ground. They worked late into the night, sorting supplies, preparing for the move. There was too much to take. Caleb's cabin had accumulated 5 years of possessions, and they could only carry what was essential. Food, weapons, ammunition, warm clothes, medical supplies. Everything else would have to stay behind. Near midnight, Emma found the wooden cradle in the storage loft. She brought it down carefully, handed it to Caleb without a word. He held it, felt the weight of memory and loss, and for a moment couldn't breathe. This was the last piece of his life with Mary, the last tangible connection to the daughter who'd never had a chance to sleep in it. We can't take it, he said quietly. No room, no way to carry it. I know. Emma touched the cradle's edge. But maybe it doesn't need to come with us. Maybe leaving it here means you're ready to look forward instead of backward. Caleb set the cradle down gently. She was right, he knew. Holding on to grief had been his way of honoring Mary, but maybe true honor meant living the kind of life she would have wanted for him. A life that included love, hope, a future. She would have liked you, he said. Mary. She would have liked your stubbornness, your strength. You think? I know. He pulled Emma close. She would have told me I was an idiot for waiting so long to tell you how I feel. And how do you feel? Caleb kissed her then, finally, properly. Not the brief touch of lips from before, but a real kiss, full of everything he'd been holding back. Emma responded with equal intensity, her arms coming up around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said. Probably shouldn't. Probably too soon, but I do. I love you, Emma Hartford, and I'm going to keep you safe or die trying. Then I guess you'd better not die, Emma whispered. Because I love you too, Caleb Stone, and I want a lot more than a week or two with you. They held each other in the dim firelight, knowing the danger ahead, knowing the odds weren't in their favor. But for this moment, they had each other, and that was enough. Tomorrow they would run. Tomorrow they would fight, but tonight they would hold tight to what they'd found and refuse to let it go without a battle. They came up the trail in the early afternoon, moving with the confidence of men who knew they had superior numbers. Caleb watched them through a gap in the rocks, counting, assessing. 8 men as he'd seen from above. Morrow in the lead, the others spread out behind him in a loose formation. Good men, probably. Experienced, but they didn't know this mountain the way he did. When the riders were about halfway up the narrow trail, Caleb made his move. He'd spent the morning preparing the slope above the trail, loosening rocks, weakening the snowpack, creating an avalanche waiting to happen. Now, from his position above, he fired a single shot, not at the men, but at the rocks he'd prepared. The sound of the shot echoed across the valley, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the rocks began to move, slowly at first, then faster, gathering snow and debris as they tumbled down the slope. The avalanche wasn't massive. Caleb had controlled it carefully, didn't want to kill if he could avoid it. But it was enough. The slide hit the trail between Morrow's group and the men behind, cutting them off from each other. 4 men below the slide, 4 above, including Morrow. The men below pulled their horses back quickly, narrowly avoiding being swept away. The ones above were trapped between the avalanche behind them and Caleb's position ahead. Stone, Morrow's voice carried up the slope. That was a warning shot, I take it? More than a warning, Caleb called back. Turn around, go back to Denver. Tell Blackwood his stepdaughter isn't coming back. You know I can't do that. Then you know I can't let you pass. There was a pause. Then Morrow said, I don't want to kill you, Stone. From what I've heard, you're a decent man caught up in a bad situation. But I have my orders. Let us take the girl and you walk away from this alive. Not happening. Then we've got a problem. Morrow gestured to his men, and they began to dismount, taking cover behind rocks. Because we're not leaving without her. The first exchange of gunfire was brief, just enough to establish positions, test ranges. Caleb had the advantage of height and cover, but Morrow's men were professionals. They moved well, used cover effectively, and didn't waste ammunition. The standoff lasted through the afternoon. Occasional shots, neither side willing to commit to a full assault. Caleb knew what Morrow was doing, waiting for the men below the avalanche to find another way up, to flank his position. It was what Caleb would have done. As the sun began to set, Emma appeared beside him in his firing position. She had the rifle Caleb had given her, held it with the competence she'd developed during their weeks together. I can shoot, she said. Not as well as you, but well enough. Emma, you should stay in the shelter. We're in this together, remember? You don't get to keep me safe while you face this alone. She settled into position beside him. Tell me where to aim. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to send her back to safety, but he saw the determination in her eyes and knew it would be useless. Besides, she was right. They needed every advantage they could get. The man behind the fallen log, About 50 yards down, he said. He keeps showing himself every few minutes to check our position. Next time he does, fire just above his head. Don't hit him if you can help it. Just let him know we've got 2 rifles up here." Emma nodded, sighted carefully. When the man showed himself, she fired. The shot went wide. Intentionally or not, Caleb couldn't tell, but it had the desired effect. The man ducked back down and stayed there. "Good," Caleb said. "Keep them guessing about our numbers. Make them cautious." The light was fading fast now, turning the white snow blue and then gray. Caleb knew darkness would bring new dangers. Morrow's men could use the cover to advance, but it would also make them vulnerable. They didn't know the terrain, couldn't see the obstacles Caleb had placed, the traps he'd prepared. Just as full darkness fell, they heard it, a sound from below that made Caleb's blood run cold. More horses. More men. The reinforcements had found another way up and were approaching from the valley. Emma heard it too, looked at Caleb with fear in her eyes. "How many?" "Can't tell yet, but enough to surround us if we're not careful." "What do we do?" Caleb's mind raced, considering options, running through scenarios. They were outnumbered, outflanked, running low on ammunition. A traditional fight wasn't going to work. They needed something else, something unexpected. Then he remembered the back trail, the steep, dangerous route down the far side of the ridge. In the dark, it would be almost suicidal to attempt, but staying here was certain death or capture. "We run," he said. "Take what we can carry. Leave the rest. There's a way down the back side. In the dark. In the dark." He looked at her. "Emma, it's dangerous. Really dangerous. But it's the only chance we've got." She didn't hesitate. "Then let's go." They gathered their essential supplies quickly. Food, water, ammunition, warm clothes. Everything else would have to stay. As they prepared to leave, Caleb took one last look at the shelter, at the position they'd prepared so carefully. Then he took Emma's hand, and together they slipped into the darkness, leaving the hunting shelter behind. Below them, Morrow's men continued their approach, unaware that their quarry was already gone, climbing down a route so treacherous that no sane person would attempt it. But then, Caleb thought as they descended into the black night, sanity was a luxury they couldn't afford anymore. Spring came to the mountains slowly that year, as if reluctant to disturb the snow that had fallen so heavily through the winter. But come it did, eventually, melting the drifts and revealing the green beneath, bringing wildflowers and birdsong back to slopes that had been silent for months. Caleb stood outside the new cabin, smaller than his old one, more roughly built but solid and warm in theirs, and watched Emma work in the garden plot they'd cleared together. She moved with easy confidence now, her hands sure as she worked the soil, planted seeds they'd gotten from Jakob's trading post. Her face had tanned from the mountain sun, and she'd grown lean and strong from the work of survival. She looked up, caught him watching, and smiled. "Admiring your handiwork?" "Admiring you," he corrected, moving to join her. "The garden's just a bonus." It had been 3 months since that desperate night flight down the back side of Eagle Ridge. 3 months since they'd escaped Morrow and his men in the darkness, making their way through terrain so dangerous that several times Caleb had been certain they wouldn't survive. But they had survived, had found their way to an even more remote valley, had started again with nothing but what they'd carried on their backs. And they'd built something, not just a cabin, but a life. Jakob had helped, of course. The old trader had brought supplies, news from the outside world, and most importantly, silence about their whereabouts. As far as anyone beyond the mountain knew, Emma Hartford and Caleb Stone had disappeared into the wilderness. Morrow had searched for weeks before finally giving up and returning to Denver with the news that the girl was likely dead, buried in an avalanche or frozen in the passes. Charles Blackwood, according to Jacob, had been furious but had eventually accepted the loss. There were other business deals to make, other arrangements to pursue. Emma had become, in the eyes of civilization, a tragic footnote, another foolish girl who died running from her proper place in society. "Good riddance," Emma had said when Jacob brought that news. "Let him think I'm dead. Dead women don't have to follow anyone's rules but their own." Now watching her work in the garden, Caleb marveled at how much had changed, not just in the circumstances of their lives, but in himself. The man who'd stumbled to this mountain 5 years ago, dead in all but body, would barely recognize who he'd become. "What are you thinking about?" Emma asked, brushing dirt from her hands. "How we got here. Everything that had to happen for us to end up in this exact spot. Regrets? Not a one." He pulled her close, despite the dirt on her hands and clothes. "Well, maybe one. I wish I'd gotten to meet you under better circumstances, without the running and the fear and the men with guns. But then we might not have met at all," Emma pointed out. "And I might have ended up married to Marcus Pemberton, miserable and trapped. Sometimes I think the storm was the best thing that ever happened to me. You nearly died in that storm." "Nearly, but I didn't." She rested her head against his chest. "I found you instead." They stood together in the spring sunshine, and Caleb felt a peace he hadn't known in years. Not the empty peace of isolation, but the deep contentment of being exactly where he belonged, with exactly the person he was meant to be with. Inside the cabin, in a place of honor, sat a new hand-carved cradle. Caleb had started working on it a month ago, as soon as Emma had told him about the baby. His hands had remembered the patterns, the smooth curves, the careful joints that would hold strong for years. But this cradle was different from the one he'd left behind. That one had been marked by grief and loss. This one was made with hope. "Have you thought more about names?" Emma asked as they walked back toward the cabin. "I've been thinking about Mary," Caleb said carefully. "If it's a girl, if you'd be comfortable with it, maybe we could use her name. Not as a replacement, but as a way of honoring her," Emma finished. "I'd like that. She was part of making you who you are, and who you are is the man I love. And if it's a boy, then we'll figure it out together." Emma squeezed his hand. "We've got time." That evening, as the sun set over the peaks and painted the sky in shades of orange and gold, they sat together outside the cabin. Sarah Sawyer had visited the week before, had brought herbs and advice and the quiet wisdom of her people. She'd placed her hand on Emma's belly and smiled. "Strong baby," she'd said. "Born of 2 strong people who survived what should have killed them. This child will have iron in their bones and fire in their heart." Caleb hoped she was right, hoped their child would inherit Emma's courage and determination, her refusal to accept a life that wasn't her own choosing. Hoped the baby would grow up here in these mountains, wild and free, knowing nothing of the constraints and cruelties of the civilized world below. "Do you ever miss it?" Emma asked, as if reading his thoughts. "Civilization, I mean. People, cities, all of that?" "No." Caleb pulled her closer. "Everything I need is right here. Even when winter comes again, when we're snowed in for months. Especially then." He kissed her forehead. "I've learned something these past months, Emma. Isolation isn't the same as being alone. I spent 5 years isolated, hiding from the world, from myself, but I was completely alone the whole time." He turned her face toward his. "Now I've got you. Got our baby coming, got a future worth building. That's not isolation, that's choosing what matters." Emma's eyes were bright with tears. "I love you, Caleb Stone." "I love you too, Emma Stone." She smiled at the name. They'd married themselves, alone on the mountain with only the peaks as witnesses, speaking vows that needed no official recognition. In the eyes of the law, she might still be Emma Hartford, fugitive and thief, But up here, in the place they'd made their own, she was Emma Stone, partner and wife and soon-to-be mother. As darkness fell and the stars emerged one by one, they went inside their cabin, their home, and closed the door against the world. Outside, the mountain settled into its evening rhythms. A wolf howled in the distance. The wind whispered through the pines. The creek that ran near their cabin sang its endless song. And inside, Caleb and Emma sat by their fire, planning for tomorrow and the day after that and all the days to come. They'd survived the storm, both the literal one and the metaphorical ones that had followed. They'd found each other in the wilderness and built something strong enough to withstand whatever else life might throw at them. The mountain had tested them, had pushed them to their limits and beyond. But they'd endured. They'd more than endured. They'd thrived. And now, as spring gave way to summer and Emma's belly grew round with new life, they looked forward to whatever came next with hope instead of fear, together instead of alone. Sometimes, Caleb thought as he held his wife close and felt his child move beneath his hand, mercy was just another word for destiny. He'd shown mercy to a frozen woman at his door one winter night, never knowing that small kindness would save them both. The blizzard had lasted weeks and changed everything. But the warmth they'd found in each other would last a lifetime.